Hello, my name is Lo, and my nose is currently in a book. So one of my goals for 2020 was to read a total of 50 books throughout the year. And every other month, I am talking about all of the books that I read on this channel to keep me accountable and to just spread knowledge and book recommendations to other people if they're interested. So without further ado, let's get into the books that I read in the months of March and April. And if you want to see the books that I read in January and February, I will link that below. The first book that I read in March was called Tomboys. I don't have it with me because I let my friend borrow it, but I found this book for $1 at a random op shop, and I'm so happy I picked it up because it was soul-warming. Heartwarming, that's the word. This book is a collection of short stories, essays, even comics, poetry, a bunch of different stuff about women growing up as tomboys. Now, this book was published in, I think, 1992. So a lot of the women who contributed pieces to this book were children in the 50s and 60s, where gender roles definitely were a lot stricter. Like, for example, a lot of these women talked about growing up in rural areas and going to home ec classes and being forced to learn how to sew an apron in school. I definitely did not have anything like that kind of experience. So I really enjoyed learning about these experiences, and it definitely gave me a much bigger appreciation for the struggles that women before me have faced, especially that LGBT women have faced. All of these stories were about the formative moments in these contributors' lives. Some of the stories were about beating the neighborhood boys at baseball, or rebelling by wearing pants to school, or becoming really close friends with the other tomboy girl in the neighborhood. So it definitely had a fondness to it that was really heartwarming to read about. And of course, it also made me feel a little less alone because when I was a kid, I was also considered a tomboy, and I did grow up to be queer. So reading this, I definitely felt like I was part of a bigger community, and that's a nice feeling to have. The next book I read was this, The Life to Come. I found this at a used bookstore, and the description of it seemed really, really interesting. It focuses on different characters just kind of in their daily lives, experiencing different things, traveling different places, writing books and trying to make a life for themselves and stuff like that. I definitely thought I was going to love it because I do really like those kinds of like slice of life, in-depth delves into characters and their backstories and stuff like that. But I don't know what it was, because it's in 3 different parts that focus on different characters. I don't know, I just found it kind of difficult to become super attached to any of the characters because they were in there for that first chunk and then they were gone for the most part. Some of them appeared in different ways throughout the different parts. But yeah, I don't know. It didn't work for me. I don't know why. I was expecting like superb, ambitious, and deeply moving, and I just kind of got bored. I wasn't necessarily in the best headspace when I was reading it, so maybe that's why. I was just not really connecting with the characters as much as I probably could have or should have been, but yeah, not my favorite book. Sorry. Next is a book that I found at that same used bookstore in the $2 bin. Loving Men More, Needing Men Less. And I got this kind of as a joke because like it looks very old, like the pages are yellowed and the cover is kind of ripped, so I was like, this is probably some book from like the 60s about how to please your man and how to be a good housewife, and I thought it would be funny. But then it actually changed the way that I look at my relationships. Her premise in this book isn't to say that you need to be a housewife or that you need to be like a big old bra burning feminist, but that there is a way to assert your own independence in a relationship and also to love unconditionally, and you end up feeling a lot more content within yourself, whether or not your relationship is exactly the fantasy that you had imagined it would be. I kind of really liked it. Dr. Judith Sills gives examples of women who have come to her asking for help, and she talks about a lot of the different strategies that she recommends to her clients. The questions to ask yourself when reflecting on the relationships that you have, how to kind of reframe your thinking to be more centered on your own needs instead of just relying on your husband to financially support you, learning how to be more independent in that way, instead of relying on your relationship to give you all of your emotional validation, learning to give it to yourself. So that's the needing men less part. And then the loving men more part is about learning how to love your partner for who they are instead of who you hoped that they would be or who you want to help them become. You know, we shouldn't be looking at our relationships as projects of, oh, how can I fix this person? It should be about loving them and helping them become the person that they want to be. This book honestly did change the way that I look at my relationships. And as a queer person, I think I can use a lot of these same ideas in my relationships with women or even in my friendships. And okay, obviously there is a lot of like the historical baggage that has to do with heterosexual relationships, and she goes into that kind of history of how that was the traditional value, and then we kind of swung to the opposite side of the pendulum with like women's rights, where a lot of women became very independent and kind of started driving men away. And not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but if your desire is to be in a loving relationship, being on that swing of the pendulum might not be the best way to build a healthy and loving relationship. There's definitely still problems with it. I mean, yeah, this book was published in 1996, so clearly it's not the most like woke by modern standards, but I think the ideas that it promotes and the strategies that it provides and the examples that it gives as well. The next book that I read is this, Dead Sexy by Lette. And I found this book at another used bookstore, and it was bad. It was written in 2003, and you can really tell that it was written in 2003. I was intrigued by the description on the back because it's basically like Love is Blind. So it starts off with these two very different types of people getting matched by like some kind of reality show, and they get married on the spot. They get sent off for their honeymoon, and then if they can stay married for X amount of time, they get more money. Within the first like 20 pages, this hot, sexy doctor that she's matched with breaks through those boundaries, goes down on her, and it's described very awkwardly. Okay, this book is quite clearly written for a housewife who just hasn't gotten any good sex in the last like 6 months. And it's clearly just meant to like spark some kind of sexual interest in the book that is going to get you through the rest of it. What got me through this book, however, was that it was very funny, but not in the way that it meant to be. There are a lot of just like really bad euphemisms for sex sprinkled throughout. It talks about like the sex war a lot, which is just kind of dumb. And every chapter begins with this quote like thing that's supposed to be funny but is actually just kind of dumb. And there's this whole weird subplot about the native people at the island they're honeymooning at kind of rising up in a rebellion, and it's just not treated well. And I forgot to mention that this book somehow manages to be offensive to pretty much every single person ever. Also, by the way, every single character speaks in the same, like, overly sarcastic voice. Also, there's, like, an 8-year-old at some point who definitely does not, like, I don't know that much about childhood development, but I know that 8-year-olds don't talk the way that the 8-year-old in this book was talking. It's just a bad book. And, okay, not every book you read has to be super intellectually stimulating or whatever, but I don't know, it's just not good. And that's that. And the last book I read in the last 2 months was this, No One Is Too Small to Make a Difference by Greta Thunberg. And I know I'm not pronouncing that right, but I don't actually know how to pronounce it. Anyway, I'm sure all of us know who she is by this point. Climate activist from Sweden who has spoken to the UN, who has given TED Talks, who has done a lot of different speeches, and this book is a collection of her most impactful speeches on climate change and why it is so essential that we take this crisis seriously and actually take the steps to reverse climate change right now. She talks a lot about the future and wanting to have a future because she is a young person who will have to be dealing with this. She talks about the absolute inaction of our political systems and how politicians will say that they care about climate change but then not actually do anything to substantially address it. I mean, this book is devastating to read, but also incredibly inspiring because, you know, she's a young person who has made this her life's goal to talk to the people in power and actually hold them accountable for the things that they are doing to the world that are affecting every single person on this planet. Her passion is incredibly inspiring. The fact that she is a literal teenager going around the world getting hate from people like Donald Trump and yet continues to promote what she knows is important. I mean, like, sometimes I like just start tearing up like thinking about her because it is very difficult for me, at least, to continue caring so much about these issues that are hurting our society when I don't see change happening. I have been dealing with a lot of like activist burnout in the past couple months, years, and to read this book and really see how truly like one teenager from Sweden can start a global movement, that just makes me feel like I can continue advocating for climate as well, and that, you know, I'm not alone in what I'm feeling, and I'm not alone in being consistently anxious about the future, and I'm not alone in facing the burnout and facing the pushback. But, you know, if Greta can hold people to account, why can't I? Definitely love this book. It's very short, easy to read. The text is pretty large, and it's speeches, so it's meant to be direct, to the point, calls to action, very powerful words. It's definitely an essential for me. Most of the time when I finish a book, I typically give it away to somebody I think will benefit from it, but I think I'm gonna keep this one because I need it in my life to help me with my activism, help me with my anxiety, and I'm very glad I bought it. That is all for me for these last 2 months. I did not read as much as I should have. You would think that with lockdown and everyone stuck inside, it would be a fantastic opportunity for me to read a lot, but I don't know, I was just very stressed out, and that is not very conducive to reading, so I didn't read that much. I'm falling behind on my goal of 50 books. I should be at about 16 or 17 by now, and I am currently working on number 13. So yeah, I mean, I'm behind right now, but I am very determined to hit that goal of 50 books by the end of the year. So, you know, maybe in December, I'm just gonna have to spend the entire month reading books. And actually, I mean, I am currently in the middle of 3 different books right now. So maybe next month I'll have a few more titles to add to my list. That's all for these last 2 months. Thank you for watching, and I will see you again in 2 months, so either at the end of June or beginning of July, whenever I get around to making this video. Bye!